During my sophomore year of high school, a tragic incident occurred that forever changed my life. It all began in my freshman year when I became friends with a girl named Sarah Thompson, who sat in front of me in homeroom. Sarah and I hailed from the same neighborhood and both worked at nearby coffee shops. One evening, Sarah texted me, asking if I wanted to hang out with her. This was back when unlimited cell phone plans were not the norm. I had a basic phone with limited minutes, so every text message incurred a cost. We had to be mindful of our texting to avoid excessive charges. Sarah mentioned she had a disagreement with her mother and wanted to escape for a while by smoking some weed. I had to work that night and wouldn't be done until close to 1 a.m. Needing some extra cash, I declined her invitation but mentioned I might join her afterwards. She seemed disappointed but understood. We agreed that I would text her when I finished work to see where she was and decide if I could meet up with her. At 1:15 a.m., as soon as I got off work, I messaged her, but there was no reply. I assumed she had probably gone to bed, so I didn't think much of it. However, when I arrived at school on Monday, a heavy atmosphere hung in the air. Our teacher somberly announced, "I'm sorry to inform you all that Sarah is missing." Her family reported her disappearance after she went out and never returned home. If anyone has any information, please contact the police. My heart sank, and a wave of unease washed over me. I couldn't believe it. How could Sarah suddenly go missing? As the days passed, details of the horrifying truth emerged. It turned out that Sarah had met a guy at the coffee shop where we both worked. Initially, everything seemed fine, but tragically, he drugged and strangled her. In a chilling act of brutality, he dismembered her body and disposed of the remains in a steel drum, setting it ablaze. The weight of guilt pressed upon me. I couldn't help but replay that night in my mind repeatedly. Should I have gone with her? Could I have made a difference? Or would we both have fallen victim to that evil murderer? Sarah's father, an FBI agent, served as a grim reminder that even with resources and knowledge, it was impossible to protect someone from the clutches of pure evil. Every single day, I'm haunted by the memories and what-ifs. I question my choices and wonder if there was something more I could have done. The tragic loss of my dear friend, Sarah, serves as a grim reminder that the world can be a cruel and unforgiving place, where even the closest bonds can be shattered by senseless violence. This incident occurred when I was in my early teens, still deeply interested in outdoor activities like scouting and camping. While I hadn't yet developed an interest in dating, it was on the horizon. At the time, I had a strong affinity for camping and wanted to organize a backyard campout at my parents' place. Although we didn't live in the countryside, our backyard was incredibly spacious, even by my standards today. It was midsummer, and we were beginning to grow restless with the seemingly endless days of vacation. So, I approached my parents with the idea of having a backyard campout. Since all of us were scouts and had camped together before, my parents had no objections. One unique aspect of our camping trips was that each of us had our own tent. I preferred sleeping alone, which is crucial to the story. We went through all the usual camping rituals, setting up a small fire in our designated pit and indulging in delicious s'mores. In fact, it was the sight of someone buying the same s'mores ingredients at a store today that reminded me of this incident. After a night filled with typical 12-year-old boy conversations, we decided to call it a night. I'm not sure what time it was, but I read for a bit with my flashlight before drifting off to sleep easily. I woke up to an unfamiliar sound, which I later realized was the sound of my tent zipper being lowered. As my grogginess subsided, I noticed a figure standing at the entrance of my tent. I initially assumed it was one of the other boys or perhaps my father coming outside for some reason. Without hesitation, I grabbed my flashlight and directed its beam toward the intruder, careful not to blind them completely. In that brief moment of observation, I realized that the person entering my tent was neither my father nor any of my scout mates. He was by far the scariest looking person I had ever seen in my life. With long, unkempt hair and a wild, crazed look in his eyes, his face exuded pure madness. The man was on all fours, crawling towards me. He put a finger to his lips, signaling me to stay quiet. But my fear, not his advice, kept me silent for a moment. However, as he inched closer, I couldn't contain my terror any longer and unleashed a scream that echoed through the night. I turned to face the opposite wall of the tent, desperately trying to escape. But, of course, I wasn't going anywhere. I couldn't see any lights turning on in the house either. Fortunately, my scout mates were nearby and awakened immediately by my cries for help. I yelled to them, "There's someone in my tent. Help!" In the chaos and darkness, I couldn't discern exactly what was happening outside, but I could see the faint glow through the tent fabric. It seemed like one of my friends sprinted towards the house to fetch my parents. Meanwhile, the other boys rushed to my rescue, launching an all-out attack on the intruder who was desperately trying to enter my tent. He even managed to grab hold of my foot momentarily before releasing it under the assault of my friends. I couldn't tell whether they forcibly pulled him out of the tent or if he tried to escape himself, defying their relentless assault. What mattered most to me was that he had let go of me. Suddenly, a gunshot pierced the night, causing further commotion and shouts from the boys. Still paralyzed with fear, I remained inside the tent until my older brother came to get me. He rushed me and the other boys back to the safety of the house, while I work as a police officer in South Jersey, and I've been on the force since I turned 23. Contrary to what people might think, it's not always as thrilling as it seems. In my county, not much really happens. Most of the calls we get are disturbances or the occasional shoplifting, with the occasional more serious incident sprinkled in once in a blue moon. I've worked every possible shift, from day to night, and while the night shift tends to have its fair share of strange calls, there was one particular night that stood out. It was a quiet night shift, and I was patrolling a desolate road with no streetlights, surrounded by dense woods. As I was driving, I noticed the reflection of taillights on the grass to my right. As I approached, I realized that the driver's side door was wide open. Concerned, I veered onto the grass and slowed down, intending to offer assistance to the driver. Just as I was about to step out of my car, I saw someone emerge from the vehicle and stand by the open door for a moment. And then, without warning, they bolted into the woods. I immediately radioed in a report of a suspicious person or vehicle, and with my flashlight in hand and my hand on my holster, I got out of the car. I cautiously approached the front of the car and peered inside, half expecting to see someone else in there. But the car was empty, except for a putrid smell emanating from within. It was a foul odor, like that of decaying flesh. I called out into the woods, asking if anyone was there and needed help, while scanning the tree line with my flashlight. As I returned to the car to investigate further, I noticed that it had no license plates. And when I glanced into the rear seats, I made a horrifying discovery. The floor and the back seats were littered with blood-soaked tissues and paper towels. It was a grisly sight, with dark red stains covering the entire papers. While examining the car, I heard footsteps coming from the woods. I spun around, shining my flashlight in the direction of the sound, and shouted, "Come out of the woods." But I couldn't see anyone. Someone was definitely hiding there, confirmed by the deep voice that echoed beyond the trees and bushes. I couldn't make out what the voice said, but it didn't sound like someone in pain or distress. Moreover, why would they run into the woods upon seeing a police car? Something was definitely off. I returned to my car and called for backup, informing them that there might be a potential murder case. I turned on the lights of my cruiser to make it easier for other officers to locate me. When backup arrived, we conducted an extensive search of the woods, looking for any signs of blood trails or the person who had fled. But there was nothing. No traces of blood leading away from the car, which meant that the severed hand and the blood-soaked tissues I had found may not have belonged to the person who ran into the woods. Hours went by as we tirelessly searched, but the person remained elusive. We even had the K-9 unit join in, but still, there was no sign of anyone. The stolen car was impounded, as it had been reported stolen by a resident of a nearby town who claimed to have no knowledge of who could have taken it. Fingerprints were lifted from the steering wheel, and DNA testing was conducted on the severed hand, but there were no matches in the database. To this day, the driver of that car remains unidentified, as does the owner of the severed hand. The case remains a mystery, with no progress made in.